Good evening. My name is Martin Schwartz, and I'm the New Jersey coordinator for the Jewish Labor Committee. The JLC was formed nearly 90 years ago by labor unions and Jewish organizations in response to the rise of Nazism and fascism across Europe, organizing a boycott of German products and rescuing more than 1,000 Jewish and non-Jewish political and cultural leaders. Today, the JLC is recognized as the voice of labor in the Jewish community and the voice of the Jewish community with organized labor. With the midterm elections about 2.5 weeks away, it has become clear that these midterms will be like few others in our history. The revelations of the January 6th Congressional Committee and the fact that about 300 election deniers are on the ballot in many states across the country, many who are candidates for states positions responsible for supervising and certifying elections, has many of us concerned about the future of democracy in the United States as we know it. And so tonight's panel discussion: how are the Jewish and labor communities preparing for these elections to preserve democracy and ensure that all who are eligible to vote are able to vote and that their votes are counted? And we are grateful for the panelists who are with us tonight to share their thoughts. I want to thank our co-sponsors for making this program possible, the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West and their staff, Linda Schertzer, director of the Federation's Community Relations Committee, and her administrative assistant, Mara Gelman, and the New Jersey AFL-CIO, Charles Balkanich, president, and Laurel Brennan, secretary-treasurer. And of course, this would not have been possible without the guidance of the JLC executive director, Aryeh Leibowitz. Before I introduce our moderator, Stuart Applebaum, there are a few bits of housekeeping. First, please make sure you are muted. If you have a question, please put it in the button that says Q&A by clicking that icon on the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to make a comment, you can click the chat icon and only the panelists will be able to see that. Lastly, the program is being recorded and a link will be provided in the next day or two so that you can share it with your friends and colleagues. So without further ado, I am pleased and honored to introduce our moderator, Stuart Applebaum. He is currently the national president of the Jewish Labor Committee. He is also president of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union and serves as an executive vice president of the 1.3 million member United Food and Commercial Workers International Union. Stuart is a vice president of the National AFL-CIO and a member of the Federation's Executive Council, where he co-chairs the Federation's International Affairs Committee. He also currently serves as a vice president of the New York State AFL-CIO and a member of the Executive Committee. Stuart is a member of the Executive Council of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations and is a board member of the Latino Victory Fund. He is a summa cum laude graduate of Brandeis University, where he was named a Louis Dembitz Brandeis Scholar and was elected a member of the Phi Beta Kappa. He graduated with honors from Harvard Law School, and he is a member of the Bar of the State of Connecticut. He resides in New York City with his husband, Michihiro Osawa. Stuart, go ahead.
Thank you, Marty, for that long and unnecessary introduction. And thank you for the extraordinary work you do in New Jersey and across the country. And I think it's very important that you helped put this event together today. I'm really delighted to welcome everyone today for what's an important discussion about democracy and voting and the common interests of the Jewish community and the labor community, our common ground, and the opportunity to explore how it is that we are able to work together. As we all know, democracy is under threat all over the world with the rise of totalitarianism. And as we also all know too well, it's even under attack here in the United States, something that most of us would never have dreamed could be possible. We never dreamed that January 6th could be possible, or that we would be reverting to create restrictions on the opportunity people have to vote and to protect our democracy. Today, we want to explore why democracy is important and how it is under threat, why voting rights are important to both the Jewish community and the labor community, and most importantly, what can we do together to strengthen our democratic institutions, and especially to ensure that all who are eligible to vote have easy access, meaningful access to the ballot box, and to ensure that their votes will be counted. We have some really amazing panelists with us today, and I'm really honored to be with them. Aaron Dorfman is the founder and executive director of the Jewish Partnership for Democracy, a More Perfect Union. The Partnership for Democracy, a More Perfect Union, is an effort to mobilize the American Jewish community to protect and strengthen American democracy. A More Perfect Union's work in 2022, this is its inaugural year, is focused on ensuring a free, safe, and accessible 2022 midterm election by supporting American Jewish institutions to recruit poll watchers, poll workers, and lawyers, to establish new polling sites and to build relationships to support local union officials. We're also joined by Rabbi David Versberg, who is the senior rabbi at Temple B'nai Abraham of Livingston, New Jersey. In addition to his congregational work, Rabbi Versberg is involved in several local and statewide social justice efforts. He serves on the Central Conference of American Rabbis Response Committee and is a chaplain with the Maplewood Police Department. And then we have two union officials, Eric Richard. Eric Richard is the Legislative Affairs Director for the New Jersey State AFL-CIO, a position he's held since 2001. Eric has been appointed to various boards and commissions by 3 governors, both Republican and Democrat. His appointments included serving 7 years as a commissioner to the State Health Benefits Commission and to the Department of Labor's Advisory Council on workers' compensation for over 10 years. Eric is a member of the American Federation of Teachers and served as a part-time lecturer at Rutgers University, where he taught the undergraduate course, American Unions and Politics. For over a decade, he was an instructor for the Union Leadership Academy, teaching the course Labor and Politics. And our final panelist is John Shea III. John is the New Jersey State AFL-CIO COPE Director. COPE is the Committee on Political Education. It's the vehicle for labor's political involvement. And he's been doing that since 1997. And he is a proud 37-year member of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters Local 255, and has been responsible for planning and directing the statewide political education and mobilization efforts, which includes the Labor Candidates Program. And he's been working with that program since its inception for the last 25 years, which has recruited union members to run for office. And it is the most successful program of its kind anywhere in the United States. And with that, I really want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us this evening. And Rabbi Vesberg, I'd like to start with you if I could. And I'd like to ask you why you're doing this. What do the Jewish teachings tell us about the importance of democracy and why Jews should work to strengthen democratic institutions?
Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for moderating this and for the invitation to come and speak. Our interest in supporting democratic institutions from the Jewish perspective, it actually comes from a lot of different parts of our tradition. I'll try to be concise on this one to leave a lot of room for conversation. First of all, we have our overall principles that every human being is created in God's image, and therefore we need to honor every human being. We need to have systems that ensure that human beings are not put above others. We see this from the beginning in our polemic against the societies around us. We just have to look at Egypt, which presents to us a society where one human being is put above all others, and it becomes a power structure to support the human being who we treat like God, right? Moses goes in there as God's representative, and God gives Moses God-like powers to be able to fight this human being that is presented as a God. And this freedom that we are given, it's not freedom from serving one human being to go do whatever the heck we want in the wilderness. It's freedom to be able to serve a higher set of ideals, which is that we're not here to serve a single human being. We are here to carry out God's holy work and serve God in this world. Freedom is not this notion that seems to be coming up more and more of I get to do whatever I want. Freedom means looking out for each other and supporting everyone so we can all live a life that gives us dignity and good health and everything else that we ought to desire for each other. So those are some of the overall principles that really support our Jewish work. We also have a strong history in Judaism of supporting the nations in which we live and wanting their systems to function effectively. Right from the exile, when we go in, Jeremiah says, be good citizens wherever you are. Do what it takes to prosper there. Jeremiah in chapter 29 says to seek the welfare of the city to which we have been exiled, to pray to God on that city's behalf, because in that city's prosperity, we will prosper, that we only know that, or that we know that we will only do well if the society in which we live is doing well. And to be clear, we have only done well for the long term in a society when it has been a relatively progressive democracy. We've had short terms of living well under authoritarian regimes through our history, but it really is only at the pleasure of the ruler. It's in a more democratic system that we have thrived, unlike ever before. Not only that, we need to use our gifts well. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in 1984 in one tshuva pointed out that on the shores of the United States, we found a safe haven. Our rights were guaranteed by the Constitution. And in recognizing the gifts, the benefits that are afforded to us, the Jewish principle that he cites is hakarat hatov, when we receive gifts like this, we have to make the best of them. We have to safeguard our freedoms. We have to safeguard this democratic system, which gives us the right to have a say in our well-being and in the well-being of others. And so rabbis like Moshe Feinstein actually say that our voting, our participating in this system is a mitzvah. It's required. There's another rabbi who went so far as to say that if it's a choice between paying the poll tax, which was required in some other countries, or being able to buy tefillin, we should pay the poll tax because tefillin can be loaned to you. But your democratic right, that one is yours and yours alone, and you have to make sure of that. We also, from the early days, have democratic institutions built right into our Jewish religious systems. In the book of Deuteronomy, we are told to have magistrates and priests. for when we don't know what we are supposed to do with our Torah texts. The priest, that's a hereditary, non-democratic system, but the magistrates, these people, these judges are appointed based on their learning. It is something to which, at least at that point, every Judaic male had access, which, early stages of democracy. But there's an understanding that we all have a say in our future if we develop that level of learning. Even in our system of kings in early times. First of all, the Torah tells us don't have a king. We should not be putting one person above others. And then the Torah says, however, if you are going to have a king, it's going to be a constitutional monarchy. That king is going to have to write for himself. There's Torah of laws to understand that this king is not going to be like the other kings. This king is subject to the same laws as you. Later on, Maimonides will teach us that if this king wants to go to war and go fight somewhere, if it's not a defensive war, this king actually has to get the permission of the elders of the country, that the king can't just do whatever they want. We see that that King David had to be confirmed by all of Israel's elders, and then Solomon actually had to be ratified by all of the people, that God couldn't even select the rulers. It had to be determined by the people. Later on, we see in our Jewish communities that decisions that are not obviously determined by Torah, they're determined by vote. And we had to have majority votes, and minority voices had to be recorded as well. From the days of the Talmud, we see that there's incredible value in having disagreement, both to know that this conversation was had and that every perspective was represented. And we also know that at some point, the minority opinion may eventually be useful when we are developing further opinions. It might actually be relevant to the majority. Lastly, in any form of study, we're not allowed to do so by ourselves. We're supposed to do so in chavruta. We can only come to greater revelation if we actually debate with another person. And not just someone who agrees with us, but someone who may disagree with us. As long as we are debating in what our tradition says is b'shem shamayim, for the sake of the heavens, not debating for our own egos or power, but if we are representing different views to achieve a higher purpose, to achieve something that is holy, because it is in that dynamic, it is in the sharing of ideas, again, with a higher goal, that we can achieve better results. And so I would venture to say that our tradition not only pushes for a democratic system where all voices are represented, it also pushes us to have a multivocal system to ensure that we can really come up with a better product for all human beings within that system that represents more voices than just that dominant voice. So in a nutshell, that's the Jewish perspective on democracy.
Thank you, Rabbi. I want to follow up on that by asking Aaron how these concepts really relate to the work he's doing. Aaron, and specifically, can you tell us why a more perfect union, the Jewish Partnership for Democracy, was formed this year? What are its objectives and goals, and what is it accomplishing?
All right, Stuart, thank you. And thanks to Martin and the Jewish Labor Committee and the other sponsors, and for Rabbi Weisberg for really grounding us in Torah. I've had lots of doses of Torah over the last 4 weeks, but there's never too much. So Stuart, thanks for the question. I'll do a little bit of sort of background and then talk a bit about what we're up to. I feel like it is a cliche in this era to talk about living in unprecedented times, but I also feel like it's worth naming things that we've been inured to in this moment. The fact that we are experiencing in this country generational levels of affective polarization, right? Affective polarization is the disagreement with people who, the experience of like hatred and fear of people with whom we disagree, which is different from normal polarization, which is just disagreeing with them. We're at generationally high levels of that in this country. There are levels of distrust in election administration that we've never experienced here. The Justice Department is already investigating more than 1,000 threats of violence against election officials in 2022 alone. We're seeing the departures of huge numbers of election officials, people who've been serving for a long time as civil servants administering our elections. There are people running for office who will be on the ballot in 2.5 weeks who have explicitly committed to subverting elections, and the Supreme Court next spring is going to consider a case that will give state legislatures potentially the right to overturn the will of the voters in their states. These things are well known, but it bears repeating them because they are collectively evidence of a real crisis confronting our democracy that, as a couple of the previous speakers referenced, is part of a now 15-year-long backsliding in democracy globally. So that's to put a very fine point on it, that's I think the set of challenges that are confronting us. Why A More Perfect Union got off the ground is because we believe that Jews have it better in America than we've had it anywhere else in the diaspora in 2,000 years. That's a kind of a big thing to say, but I feel absolutely confident about it. We've lived in other places, reasonably well for short periods of time, but in the United States, we were at the table helping to shape this country from the very beginning. And the success that our community has experienced here is primarily a function of American democracy, a commitment to protection for religious minorities, freedom of association, the rule of law. Those things have created a container in which Jewish life has thrived here, and has thrived from the ultra-Orthodox right to the ultra-secular left in all sorts of amazing, complex expressions: day schools and camps and synagogues and JCCs and federations and Jewish family and children's services and Zionist organizations and anti-Zionist, like all the stuff lives inside that container. And I think if the last few years have reminded us of anything, it's that democracy doesn't take care of itself. It's not a self-sustaining project. And that when democracies decline, when sort of stable liberal democracies decline, Jews are among the first to take it on the chin. So that's the urgency we're confronting. What we're doing in this inaugural year, Stuart alluded to a little bit, is focused on trying to mobilize the American Jewish community to help ensure a free, fair, safe, and accessible midterm election. And the way we're doing that is very tachlis. It's very practical and pragmatic. What we've done is recruited now more than 80 Jewish institutions around the country in 15 states, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, non-denominational organizations, synagogues, JCCs, JCRCs, Jewish Family and Children's Services federations, to make bold public commitments to recruit poll workers. It takes 1 million poll workers to run a federal election in this country every 2 years. So these institutions, our partners, are out there recruiting poll workers. We're working with them to recruit nonpartisan poll monitors, to recruit lawyers to provide pro bono legal support for election officials who get targeted with frivolous lawsuits, whose families get threatened. We're working with JCCs and Hillels and synagogues around the country to serve as polling sites for the elections in a couple of weeks. So we're doing those like very, very concrete things to engage the Jewish community, Jewish civil society, in the kind of concrete nuts and bolts work of administering American elections. We're really excited about that work and looking forward to continuing this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. I'd like to get the labor perspective added to this conversation. And this question is really for both of you, Eric and John. Why are democratic institutions in securing and expanding voting rights, access to the ballot box, ensuring that every vote is counted, why are they important to organized labor? And Eric, do you want to start? Or John?
Sure. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you to all the panelists and the participants. I'm honored to be part of this Zoom chat this evening. On behalf of the AFL-CIO, just very proud that John and I have been invited to this. We partner with the Jewish Labor Committee wherever possible, and we really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this extremely important topic. Stuart, you bring up a very important point, and when the Jewish community and organized labor come together, just like through many other partnerships, is when we're the strongest. And when we work together and we focus on a single goal, and we can mobilize towards achieving that goal, the Jewish community, organized labor, and some of our community partners, we really, really, really make a statement, and we have achievements on behalf of all of our various memberships. And so to the opportunity where we can work together towards a common goal, something that is as simple as ensuring the right to vote for all of our various members, that is something that we can join hands on and be successful in when we work together. You see these types of coalitions building throughout states across the nation. Unfortunately, there's coalitions on the other side as well. And so those coalitions are working often to limit people's access to the polls, to limit minority community participation. And when that happens, that hurts all of us. The rabbi had mentioned earlier the destructiveness of trying to remove those types of very basic principles. We as labor, we as the Jewish community have to ensure that we don't have that here in New Jersey. At the state level, John and I, the AFL-CIO, work hand in hand with our partners in the legislature. And it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's making sure that everyone has equal access to the democratic process. And so wherever we can, we work united to lobby and to mobilize to ensure that some of the things that are happening in Texas, some of the things that are happening in New Hampshire, some of the very egregious obstacles that are happening at the federal level don't happen here in the state of New Jersey. And Stuart, I know you're more familiar with this than any of us in your various roles throughout the labor movement throughout the country. Here in New Jersey, we're not going to stand for that, right? And we have friends in the legislature, we have friends in our congressional delegation, fortunately, that stand with us. And so when you have a joint mobilization and a joint goal with our community partners, it's very more effective to work together. Organized labor brings resources, the Jewish community brings resources, the immigrant community brings resources. And so we can join hands and make sure that we're successful at that level. Here in New Jersey, we might not have the strongest voting access laws in the country, but we're probably close to the top 10. And I really applaud the Murphy administration for taking significant steps forward over the course of the last year to achieve a lot of things that unfortunately some of his predecessors could not achieve. So whether it's enhancing vote by mail, whether it's early voting, whether it's ensuring that we have secure online registration, all of these things come together to make sure that if you want to participate in the democratic process, you have the opportunity to do so without obstacles. And so the more of those obstacles and the more of those barriers we can tear down, the more successful we're all going to be. John, I know you have a lot to add to that as well.
Yes, I'd like to start by thanking Marty and the Jewish Labor Committee for pulling this together. And I look forward to having a great conversation tonight. Stuart's question was, why is this important to the labor movement? Back at the labor movement is a democratic establishment. Each of our local unions are democratic, our federations are democratic, our Central Labor Council are democratic. So every member's voice matters, and every member's voice is represented in who they elect. And every level of the labor movement is a democratic organization. When we endorse candidates for election, it's through a democratic endorsement process that honors the voices of all members and all organizations, and they all have a chance to speak. And as the rabbi said, if sometimes they're in the minority, but that minority voice is also recorded and it's heard. And a majority decision is what we carry through. But democracy is the core of everything we do. We know that everything that we achieve through collective bargaining at the bargaining table through strikes and struggles that could all be eliminated through the stroke of a pen if our voice is not heard effectively in the halls of the legislature, and it's not heard at the polls on election day. So we also know that whether our members work or not, in many cases, is dependent on the outcome of elections and their voice being heard through the ballot, through the polls. So it's the core of who we are. Our mission statement says that our mission is to improve the lives of working families, to bring economic justice to the workplace, social justice to community, and to unite all local unions around our shared values. So we don't just work to represent only union members. We represent all workers in all workplaces. Some are organized and some are not yet organized. And it's through legislation, it's through the voting process that the political process that we have restrictive, not only voting rights happening around the country, but restrictive labor laws that prevent people from joining unions and having a voice at work. So we want people to have a voice in their community, a voice at work, and a voice in the political processes of our communities. Thank you.
Well, what you both said is very important. I just add that unions are important for democracy because union members learn about democracy. They see democracy in action by being a member of their union. And I think we should also note, because we refer to authoritarianism sprouting up all over the place, that one of the first groups that authoritarian leaders go after is the labor movement. And we have seen that consistently throughout history. Rabbi, I'd like to ask you, is the threat to democracy an issue that you're hearing about from your congregants, from rabbinical colleagues, and from clergy from other religions? How pressing is this for the people with whom you deal?
Deeply concerned would be an enormous understatement. Across the board, it's less about this particular system of government on a high level. It's a much more practical level of there is concern from the social justice angle to make sure that all minorities are protected and have their voices heard. And we see voter suppression taking place all over the nation. And there's deep concern about that because we have these values of making sure that we look after all those who may have less of a voice. We also have a lot of concerns for ourselves, for our own need, because we see that, as mentioned this evening, we see that voices that are less democratic, voices that are less welcoming, and much more extreme voices, they really rise up whenever democracy begins to devolve. Aaron, I believe it's you who said that whenever that Jews were first on the chopping block when democracies tend to go. So there's a lot of concern on that front. We also have a lot of concern right now about not being able to have those chavruta style conversations. If we cannot even agree on what constitutes a fact, responsible journalism, these are all part of the foundation of democracy. Democracy cannot exist if we cannot agree on the same principles to debate. So there is a lot of concern about a lot of the different pieces of what seemed to be going on in this country with the democratic system. And there is also a lot of folks aren't quite sure what to do as we see more and more folks losing their patience, ability, willingness to hear those other voices. It's almost as though clergy's hands are tied because people will tell us they're concerned about this. And then there also seem to be a significant number of people who want to stick their heads in the sand and not hear about it similarly. So
And unfortunately, at times, there's something even worse. I've been horrified to see recent polling that shows that support for democracy is declining, especially among young people. And I think that's something we have to worry about as well.
We also, in addition to that, are seeing a phenomenon where Israel is being cast to one side of this democracy, which is forcing erroneously, I believe, but it's forcing people into thinking that they have to choose between the American democratic system and support for Israel, which is really quite problematic from a Jewish standpoint. And we really should not be shoved into that position where we feel like we have to make that choice.
Thank you. Aaron, what are the main obstacles you're finding in your work?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think echo some of the things that some of my fellow panelists have mentioned. There was a poll that came out in the New York Times earlier this week about the degree of anxiety among American voters about democracy. 71% of voters think that democracy is under serious threat in this country, and something like 7% of them are going to make that a primary factor in their voting decisions, right? So democracy is like abstract and hard and messy and sort of far away, and it's about systems, and it doesn't affect my day-to-day choices. And so figuring out how to translate the anxiety and concern, fear that people are experiencing into practical decision making, I think, is a huge obstacle. I'll reference George Packer, who wrote after the January 6th uprising that the greatest asset that the kind of authoritarian forces in the United States have is our failure of imagination, right? Like we can't imagine that thing, whatever that next thing is that will happen, right? I mean, if you can put yourself back January 5th, 2020, and imagine that the Capitol was going to be stormed by people who were going to beat police officers and smash windows and defecate in the Capitol, right? If I had told you that, it would have been incomprehensible. And we're now, we have, or a large portion of the population has normalized that as legitimate political discourse. So I think that's a huge, probably the single greatest obstacle. And I'll just say one other thing to try to be very stark about it. When I talk about January 6th, the historical analogy that feels most salient for me is the beer hall putsch. So Adolf Hitler tried a coup in Germany in 1923 and failed and went to jail. And 10 years later, he was elected chancellor. So the idea that we can be 18 months post January 6th and imagine that we're like out of the woods somehow, that we shouldn't be hyper vigilant for 10 or 20 years in response to an event like that, we're really like missing one of the critical lessons of history, a lesson of history, 99 years ago. So that I think is to me, the greatest obstacle is like how to translate the anxiety, the real deep historical lessons into a capacity to imagine what might happen and how we need to act in order to respond to it.
Thank you. John, I'm going to ask you in your work in Get Out the Vote efforts that you're involved in, what impression do you have from people you speak to about how concerned they are about the threat to democracy? And John, you're on mute.
Thank you, Stuart, for that question. I'm going to answer it with two different ways. It's depending on the people I'm speaking with. If I'm speaking with labor leaders, they understand the threat and they feel the threat. When I hear from labor leaders about what their members are saying, they're as polarized as the rest of the country. It's left or right, and there's no moderation in between. And as Aaron said, the level of anger, if you have an opinion that differs from somebody else, I've never seen before. I don't think we're going to change that. You asked me in terms of how I'm working with Get Out the Vote. I look at elections a little bit differently as an election mechanic than others do. To me, it's all about numbers. And we have to get more votes than our opposition. And we together, we have enough people to win these elections across the board. It's how do we motivate them and mobilize them and get them to cast their ballots. And New Jersey now we have, because of what Eric said, Governor Murphy and his legislature have been very proactive about expanding access to the ballot and tearing down barriers to the ballot. And we need to make sure that that continues in that trajectory so that we continue to tear down barriers across the country. There were 27 states last year that had erected barriers. Over 250 bills have been introduced in legislatures to erect barriers to the ballot, and they disproportionately affect Black and brown communities in our country. And those happen to also be Democratic votes. And I think that a lot of these barriers are being placed in and built, erected to the ballot. It has to do with one party or the other trying to get an advantage towards that electing the vote count, how many votes they need to win, how to get them out. There used to be recognizable 3 different ways to win an election. If you don't have enough votes to win up front, you have to register more voters of like-minded voters to change the nature of the electorate. Second, you have to persuade those voters who are undecided. And historically, it was 15, 20% of the electorate that would swing one way or the other. That's narrowed considerably in the last couple of years, especially with the MAGA crowd, narrowed considerably. And the third way was to do a better job of getting out your vote. Historically, there's always been a fourth way, but it really showed its head in 2000. And that was during the Florida election fiasco. And the fourth way is to manipulate election laws. And the Bush administration and Bush, when he was a candidate, and Karl Rove and the whole group, they managed to go ahead and manipulate the laws after ballots were cast. But now we're seeing election laws being manipulated before anybody has access to any ballot. And it starts with access to the rolls. It starts with access to the voter rolls. We saw in Georgia 4 years ago, Kemp knocked a couple 100,000 people off the voter registration rolls, right? So that they couldn't go to the polls, they couldn't vote. The couple 100,000 people they're gone. It gave him an advantage. And we've seen more and more election laws changed in the states that are meant to give the Republican Party that electoral advantage before candidates are even in place, before a campaign start. So I think what's really important in this conversation is the idea that we have enough votes to win any of these elections. How do we get those people out to vote? And it's not the job of a campaign to get everybody out to vote. It's the job of a campaign is to get your supporters out to vote. So our like-minded members to come out and vote. So I hope I answered your question, Stuart.
You did. And it's the job of the campaign to get like-minded members out to vote, but now people also see the job, some groups see the job as preventing people who disagree with them from coming out to vote. This is really a question for everyone, but Eric, I'll turn to you. Actually, a 2-part question I'll do. The first one relates to you. Are there legislative initiatives out there in New Jersey right now relating to voting rights or protecting democracy? Anything that we should be concerned about or that we should be supporting?
Well, thank you, Stuart. Well, there are. Long story short, there's always progress that can be made. One particular issue that comes to mind is same-day registration. Same-day registration has been acted in a few states. It's been hung up here in the state of New Jersey for mostly bureaucratic county clerk reasons about how to ensure the accuracy of same-day registration and same-day voters. So we could make progress on that. We could push the envelope on that. That's something that advocates continue to work for with the state legislature. That has not yet been enacted. There are also, frankly, because of some of the recent actions of the U.S. Supreme Court in regard to the Voting Rights Act and chopping out certain sections of the Voting Rights Act, there's now a push underway throughout the nation for certain states to enact a mini Voting Rights Act. And so there's legislation that's now being introduced in states that seeks to ensure that at the state level, that certain provisions of the Voting Rights Act, particularly when it pertains to disenfranchising minority voters, that can't be struck down through a United States Supreme Court decision. And so there are state protections now moving forward to ensure that what's happening at the federal level doesn't water down to the state level. The mood at the federal level in regard to our anti-democratic institutions has a lot of impact on voter turnout. And frankly, there are institutions at the federal level that I think folks could argue both ways, but have been around for centuries. Many that we see as anti-democratic, whether it's the redistricting process, whether it's the flood of money and corporate money into the election process, Supreme Court decisions that now say that money is speech and that money is corporations are people. This all turns off the electorate. When the electorate looks at the filibuster, when they look at the Senate, a lot of folks view the United States Senate in of itself as an undemocratic institution due to the allocation of votes based upon no population count. That Iowa or Montana gets the same number of senators as the state of California. Many view that plain and simply as anti-democratic institutions. So voters are turned off by that. When they see that, that conflicts with everything we were taught about one person, one vote, right? When someone can dump $100 million into an election, that one person, one vote really doesn't apply anymore. You know, when you have the opportunity to create your own legislative district to ensure that as long as you win the primary, you can never be defeated, that sows seed of discontent among the electorate. And so while we see barriers, as John had mentioned, to turning out vote, a lot of these institutions, a lot of these laws are coming from our own courts and are coming from our own Congress and are coming from our own legislature. And they seek to put limitations on what these leaders perceive as being not their supporters. So how can we carve out or how can we create laws that disenfranchise folks that don't think the way we do? At the state level, we're going to continue to move forward to try to enact some of these provisions that broaden access to the polls. But the things that I mentioned often can't be legislated at the state level. They have to be done federally. And at the federal level, some of these things are so divisive and we're so partisan at this point that I'm not sure we're ever going to find a solution under our current structure in Congress on how to fix some of these things. Some of the progressive states are making very good inroads in expanding voter access, but as I opened with, on the flip side of that coin, other states are taking a step backwards. We would hope a lot of these states would follow what's happening in California, what's happening in New Jersey and other states. But again, it's so political and it's so divisive. We're fortunate to have a majority in the state legislature that agrees with most of the folks on this call, and they're taking significant steps forward. And I mentioned, I do see the mini Voting Rights Act becoming a very real issue in the state, and hopefully that'll be in place prior to next year's election.
Great. Good. Rabbi Weisberg, I believe there's a point you want to make.
Yes, thank you. just recognize, sorry, I had a point I wanted to make before, but how troubling is it that preserving democracy is now a partisan issue, or that it feels as though it is a partisan issue? I found myself responding to what John was saying before, and this is a yes and. Yes, we have to be concerned about numbers. Yes, we have to be concerned about putting legislation into place to preserve people's ability to vote. And we need a culture shift. We need to be doing a lot of work that has nothing to do with legislation, because if all we're concerned about are numbers and voting, everyone is going to be continually looking over their shoulders at what is to come, right? To be, again, more creative and thinking, what are the possibilities of how awful things can get? A lot of us were completely dismayed under the last administration, because when we took issue with something that was being done from the ruling majority, we had absolutely no voice. It used to be that you could protest, and if enough people spoke up, it would be heard. There were channels that could be used to bring about change that were not just about voting. It very much felt like those channels were now ignored, that the leadership was only responsible to some in their party, which means that it isn't just about the vote. It isn't just about trying to get back a system that was. It's about actually trying to shift the culture to move us back from a polarizing, enemy versus enemy situation, and to say, we have two parties here, with some other little groups on the side, and we're all trying to solve a problem together. We're all trying to build that more perfect union. How can we get back to a culture where we're actually willing to debate? I don't know what the answer is, but if we cannot get there, the democracy is over.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of provocative points have been made this evening. I wonder if there are any questions in the chat room that anyone would like to put in now. If anyone has any questions for the panelists. And I think that David Fallick, there's something you wanted to say. And you're on mute, David.
Thank you. May I show my picture?
Of course.
Okay. Someone else has stopped, the host stopped my picture, so I'll just say, yeah, I'm David Fallick. I live in Rockville, Maryland. And I just want to mention what I've been doing with the hopes that all 13 million union members in the country might do the same, and not just union members. So I've been involved in postcard writing. I've hit about 1,200 postcards now since summer of 2020. Get out the vote postcards, get registered to vote postcards, and about 450 postcards to people to call their senators and tell them to pass the For the People Act, and then the Freedom of Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And I've also, today, in fact, I'm supposed to have my second editorial in the St. Louis Southern Illinois Labor Tribune on the topic of voting rights and electing Democrats, and also how that connects to unions, and that union members need to, and everybody needs to get out and campaign for Democrats. And they're going to print a third one next week. And so I just wanted to say, it's a great discussion. And I think also people need to just say, okay, what action I'm going to take. I think the biggest problem in this country is getting through to the people who are indifferent or don't care. When I approach somebody with a flyer about voting rights and they say, "Oh, I'm not into politics." And it's incredible to me. So I just want to encourage everybody to, wake up tomorrow morning and go work for a campaign or something. And I'm
Great.
glad to be here. Thanks.
I thank you for what you're doing. I think it's really important. It's not just enough for us to analyze and worry and complain. We actually have to go out and take action. Linda Scherzer from the Federation had a question she wanted to pose. Linda?
Thank you. Actually, I put it in the chat, but my question is, what opportunities, are there opportunities that exist in the state of New Jersey for the Jewish and labor communities to work together in advance of and on election day? And if they don't exist, how can we create that? Because I represent the Jewish Federation, and we would love to find ways to partner with the labor community to work together.
If I may answer that, Stuart, there's many opportunities for us to work together from here through Election Day. We've worked with the Jewish Labor Committee for years. I know that Laura always had spearheads the effort to have the lawyers that are available on Election Day. We truly appreciate that. They've been critically important in protecting the vote every year in New Jersey. If individuals want to volunteer, as David is in a campaign, we have opportunities to volunteer throughout the state, all of our counties, on phone banks, as in the evenings, Monday through Thursdays, 6 to 8, and every Saturday morning we have labor walks. And it's not required that somebody be a union member to join in the labor walks. Anybody who wants to join us is welcome to. We use modern technology, the minivan. We'll train them. We'll give them meaningful work, and they'll have a great experience. And I'm sure they'll bring more people to it. All this can be found on our website, and we have a website, njunionstrong.org and njunionstrong.com, and everything that anybody needs about elections is there. Additionally, for any partner organization, we have education materials that you can use. You can take anything you want that's on our website and use it. We have every link that voters would need if they have questions about processes for voting, whether you vote by mail, early vote, ballot box, drop box locations, their polling location, check if they're registered to vote, information about candidates. We have what we produce is called Code U, Committee on Digital Empowerment for unions. There's material on there that you can take and just simply copy and paste and put it on your social media accounts. Anybody can take that and put it up. There's sample tweets, there's sample text, there's sample Facebook posts, there's images. It's every way that we communicate in these modern campaigns. We have sample material for you to use and any of our partners to use right on that website.
Yeah, Stuart, if I may also just
Right.
a clarification, the minivan is not an actual minivan, it's an app, right, that helps you track canvassing when you go door to door, which it's an incredible tool because it feeds the information that you get from speaking to a voter directly to your database. So I just wanted to make sure that was understood. Thanks. I've used it, it's really helpful.
And I'll just say that I've actually used minivan in a minivan. So that's also possible and totally legit. I'll just echo. I think John like raised a bunch of excellent suggestions. We at a More Perfect Union, with supportive partners like Jewish Labor Committee, have been doing things like recruiting, as I mentioned before, recruiting lawyers to provide pro bono legal support for election officials who get targeted, and things of that nature. If you're curious about those things, you can check us out at jewishdemocracy.org, www.jewishdemocracy.org, and there's still some opportunities. We're more on the election administration side. A lot of those things are kind of already in motion, but there's still some opportunities to participate. So we welcome interest there.
Yeah, and Aaron, I am also a poll worker in New Jersey. So
Thank you for your
I've been for
service.
several years, and I'd be happy to let anybody know who's thinking about it, like what a really a fun experience it can be, especially if you have a good team of fellow poll workers. It's a place where Republicans and Democrats can get together and work together, and some independents as well. So.
We're getting to the point where we're about to close off this conversation, even though it's an ongoing conversation. It's just that we won't be online together. There's another question from Michael Nye, who's a good friend of many of ours. And I'd like to do two things. I'd like to ask people if they want to comment on his question, which is, other than same day registration, what else can we do to expand the electorate? And at the same time, also give each of you the opportunity to give any closing thoughts. And why don't we start maybe in the order in which we started, Rabbi Weisberg.
Thank you. I am no expert in legislation so much as Jewish responses to it and advocating for it. We do best when we live in an inclusive society. We understand that we are all immigrants here. We are all, depending on how you want to translate the word ger, we are all strangers. We are all foreigners. We have all showed up from somewhere else, and we really all need to remember our roots. That we have been able to climb up wherever we are because someone welcomed us and someone gave us space to thrive. We have an obligation to do that for everyone else. And to be quite crass, it's in our best interests. So let's do all that we can to preserve this democracy and this golden nation.
Great. Good. Aaron.
Love Rabbi Weisberg's reference to the Golden Medina, which is, I think, how Rav Moshe referred to the United States. So I'm going to say two quick things. One is David Fallick earlier said that he encounters people who say that they're not interested in politics, and I feel like there's an important counter message to that, which is politics is interested in you, right? Like this politics is how we do. How we build and live in this country together. And so I think that there's an important counter narrative to the people who say that politics is not something they're interested in or they want to avoid it, because it's the soup we live in. So I think that's really important. And then on the expanding the electorate, like, I think there are a lot of great suggestions that have been floated already around legislation. I will just name one very particular thing about ensuring the vote. The single greatest predictor of whether a registered voter votes on election day is that their friends vote, right? That they have friends and family members who vote. So, like, to expand the number of people who vote, make sure that on election day, you reach out to 3 other people and just ask them if they voted.
Great. Eric?
Yes, thank you, everyone. And, Aaron, as you mentioned that, it triggered something in my memory when I have my class, my undergraduate class, what I say to them in regard to being disengaged or I'm not political and I don't understand politics. The way to look at this is at a very local level, and to understand that what I would say to them is that everything in your life, whether you know it or not, is political in one way or another. Whether you go to a quality school is political, whether or not your water is clean and the air you breathe is political, whether or not the beach you go to has sand replenishment is political. Every day you're going to encounter and be making decisions that you may or may not know is political. And so either you get engaged or that politics is going to impact your life, perhaps in a way that you like or you don't like. And so to answer the question, how do you expand the electorate? It's really to hold our elected officials accountable. You expand the electorate by having people feel that they matter. I unfortunately think a lot of people feel they simply don't matter, that their vote doesn't matter, their opinion doesn't matter, and that our elected officials are not responsive. We need to ensure as labor leaders and as leaders in the Jewish community that we do hold our elected officials accountable, and that those elected officials deliver a message and understanding to residents about how everything in their community in one way or another is impacted by politics. So you need to get involved. You need to hold your elected officials accountable, and your elected officials need to do a better job of being responsive to the needs of their constituents.
Thank you. Very good. John?
Well, I want to say thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this forum today. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. To your question of most people think of the word politics and politician as a four-letter word. And we talk about politics and we talk about election administration and we talk about fair and free elections and election voter integrity and election integrity. People's eyes roll back in their head, and the conversation, while we want to have a long conversation, they want to listen to this for about 5-10 seconds. And then they've tuned you out, tuned us out. At our Labor Candidate School, which I've been doing for 25 years of teaching union members to run for public office, I tell them that a study was not too long ago, maybe 20 years ago, a study was how much time does the average voter spend thinking about politics in a year? And the answer is less than 10 minutes. So when we're here for an hour talking about election integrity and fair and free elections and what we could do about it, the average voter doesn't think about this stuff. They're thinking about their lot in life, and they're thinking about how they're going to make a living. They're thinking about how tough it is for them, all the struggles they're going through, and they don't have time to think about this. And they think, well, I don't really bother. Why should I bother to vote? Because I don't have much time anyway. And what difference will my vote make? So we have to figure out how to engage people who only want to talk about politics for 10 minutes a year. What will go ahead and push the button, the light bulb goes off, and they care? I don't have the answer to that, but that's the challenge we have. Again, thank you for the opportunity to participate.
And John, I think in a way that's a good way to conclude, because I think that part of what your message is that this is also something we can't just be talking about right before an election, but it's an ongoing conversation and finding ways for people to focus on it, not just in the weeks before we go to the polls, but throughout the year. And it's just as important for us to be having this conversation after the November election as it is before. And we're going to really have to be focusing on this for the next 2 years, regardless of the results in just 3 weeks. So to all of the panelists, it's really been an enlightening discussion. I want to thank you all for such a great discussion. And to all the people who tuned in, I want to thank you all. It's so important that you were on this evening. This conversation has been recorded, and we will be circulating it to a broader audience. And finally, just as a point of personal privilege, I see that one of the people who signed in this evening is one of the greatest labor leaders I've ever known, who's also the former president of the Jewish Labor Committee, Lenore Miller. And I want to thank you for inspiring so many people to be involved in so many ways over the years. Thank you all. And everybody, have a good evening and keep working.
Yes, and I don't think we have to say this, but make sure you vote, get your absentee ballots in, your vote by mail ballots in. I think I'm speaking to the choir, but get that message out. Thank you. Thank you, Stuart.